This is impossible! Captain Jake Morrison's voice echoed with 6 hours of mounting frustration inside Fort Benning's advanced breach training facility. The 28-year-old Ranger officer stood sweating in full combat gear, staring at the massive steel door that had defeated every attempt his elite team could devise. The 75th Ranger Regiment's best breaching specialists surrounded the obstacle like surgeons around a patient they couldn't save. Linear charges, thermite, plasma cutters, hydraulic spreaders, nothing had even scratched the monster. The door was 8 inches of hardened steel set into reinforced concrete with multiple locking mechanisms that mocked their modern equipment. Harold Hank Morrison had been watching the Rangers' futile efforts from his position near the maintenance shed. At 79 years old, he looked exactly like his identification claimed, a civilian contractor responsible for facility maintenance. His weathered hands, stained with decades of honest work, gripped a simple toolbox containing basic hand tools. He wore his usual faded red work shirt that had survived more wash cycles than most soldiers had deployments, blue jeans with permanent grease stains, and worn work boots. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his pale blue eyes held the quiet intelligence of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems others couldn't. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving streaks in the debris covering his face. "Sir, we've tried everything in a manual. That door isn't moving." The other Rangers nodded grimly, their expensive equipment scattered around like remnants of a failed siege. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were America's premier light infantry, men who had breached compounds in Afghanistan and Iraq. The fact that a training door was defeating them was professionally humbling. Morrison had been employed at Fort Benning for 12 years, maintaining training facilities that prepared warriors for combat. He was invisible to most soldiers, just another aging contractor keeping lights working and floors clean. The Rangers had barely acknowledged his presence during their 6-hour battle, treating him with casual dismissal that young warriors often showed elderly civilians. Morrison understood their attitude. He had been exactly where they were, though it felt like several lifetimes ago. Captain Morrison finally noticed the old man standing nearby. "Sir, this is a restricted training area. You need to clear the facility until we complete this exercise." Morrison nodded politely but made no move to leave. "Just watching, son. Impressive equipment you boys have." His voice carried calm authority that seemed out of place from a maintenance worker. Captain Morrison's patience was wearing thin after hours of failure. "Sir, I need you to move to a safe distance. We're about to attempt another breach." Morrison looked at the massive door, then at the scattered equipment, then back at the frustrated Rangers. "Mind if I ask what approach you're planning next?" Captain Morrison's jaw tightened with mounting frustration. "Sir, that's not your concern. This is military training, and you need to clear the area immediately." Morrison remained where he was, studying the door with patient attention of someone who had seen similar obstacles before. "That's quite a door," Morrison observed quietly. "Steel that thick, you're probably looking at military-grade hardening, the kind they used in certain facilities during the Cold War." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from his equipment inventory. "How would you know about military-grade steel, old man?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The slight slouch of an elderly maintenance worker straightened into something that looked suspiciously like military bearing. "I've seen doors like this before, son. Different place, different time, but same basic principles." Captain Morrison's patience finally snapped. "Sir, I don't care what doors you think you've seen. This is Ranger training, and you're interfering with a classified exercise." Morrison walked closer to the massive door, his eyes scanning its surface with methodical attention of someone conducting professional assessment. "You're treating this like a frontal assault problem, but doors like this aren't designed to stop frontal assaults. They're designed to channel attackers into predictable approaches that can be defended." He pointed to obvious breach points where Rangers had concentrated their efforts. Every attempt you've made has been exactly where the designers expected you to attack. Staff Sergeant Chan, the team's demolitions expert, found himself listening despite his better judgment. "What are you suggesting?" Morrison smiled with the expression of someone who had solved this puzzle decades ago. "I'm suggesting that whoever built this door included a weakness. They always do. The trick is understanding the mindset of engineers who designed it." He walked around the doorframe, studying concrete and steel with practiced eyes. "This facility was built in the 1980s, wasn't it? During the height of the Cold War, when we were training soldiers to breach Soviet installations." Morrison's mind drifted to another time, another place entirely. The Georgia training facility faded away, replaced by the cold, damp interior of a classified facility in West Germany. He wasn't 79 anymore. He was 25, a young staff sergeant with the 5th Special Forces Group, part of a highly classified unit tasked with training to infiltrate and destroy Soviet installations in the event of World War III. The year was 1971, and Morrison was learning to breach exactly these kinds of doors under tutelage of engineers who had designed similar obstacles for both sides of the Cold War. In that long-ago training facility, Morrison had spent weeks learning secrets of Cold War engineering. The instructors were civilian contractors who had designed defensive systems for NATO installations and studied captured Soviet blueprints. They taught young Special Forces soldiers that every defensive system included deliberate weaknesses. Not flaws, but carefully planned alternatives that authorized personnel could exploit in emergencies. "The Soviets always include a bypass," his instructor had explained, "because even they understand that their own people might need to get through these doors during a crisis." Back in the present, Morrison's eyes refocused on the frustrated Rangers. "Son," he said to Captain Morrison, "this door was built by the same contractors who designed similar obstacles for NATO installations during the Cold War. I know because I was trained to breach doors exactly like this one." The Rangers exchanged skeptical glances. Morrison continued his examination of the doorframe, his weathered fingers tracing seemingly random points along the concrete. "The weakness isn't in the door itself. It's in the frame, specifically in the emergency override system that was required by military construction standards." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped closer, his professional curiosity overriding skepticism. "What kind of emergency override?" Morrison smiled knowingly. "Fire suppression. Every facility like this was required to have a way for firefighters to gain access in case of emergency. The designers couldn't make the door completely impregnable because their own people might need to escape or rescue personnel might need to enter." He pointed to a seemingly innocuous panel near the doorframe, painted the same color as concrete and nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Captain Morrison followed Morrison's pointing finger. "That's just a utility panel." Morrison nodded. "Exactly what it's supposed to look like. But behind that panel is the emergency override for the locking mechanism. It's not connected to the main security system because it predates modern electronics. It's a purely mechanical backup system designed to be operated by firefighters with basic tools." The Rangers gathered around as Morrison opened his simple toolbox and withdrew what appeared to be an ordinary screwdriver. Morrison carefully removed the utility panel, revealing a complex mechanical mechanism hidden behind the false front. Staff Sergeant Chen stared at the exposed mechanism. "I've never seen anything like that in any manual." Morrison's hands moved with practiced precision, manipulating levers and gears that had been hidden for decades. "That's because this information was classified above your clearance level, son. The existence of these overrides was known only to special operations personnel who might need to breach similar facilities behind enemy lines." The massive steel door shuddered slightly as Morrison's manipulations began to affect the locking mechanism. Captain Morrison watched in amazement as the supposedly impregnable barrier began to respond to the old maintenance worker's touch. "How do you know about classified construction standards?" Morrison paused in his work, looking directly at the young officer. "Because 47 years ago, I was trained to infiltrate facilities exactly like this one, in places where failure meant starting World War III." The confrontation had reached what appeared to be an absolute stalemate when Specialist Martinez made a decision that would fundamentally change everything. "Captain," Martinez said carefully, "what if I contact range control directly, just to verify his credentials?" Captain Morrison nodded curtly, thinking this would finally resolve the situation. Martinez walked toward communications equipment, but instead of calling range control immediately, he decided to contact Master Sergeant Valdez first. "Master Sergeant, this is Martinez at the breach facility," he said when Valdez answered. "We have a developing situation with an elderly civilian claiming knowledge of classified breach techniques. Says his name is Harold Morrison." There was an unusually long pause on the other end of the line. When Master Sergeant Valdez finally spoke again, his voice carried tension Martinez had never heard before. "Martinez, did you say Harold Morrison?" The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. "Sweet Mother of God," Valdez said, and Martinez could hear papers rustling frantically. "Martinez, listen to me very carefully. Do not allow anyone to lay a single hand on Harold Morrison. Do you understand me completely?" Before Valdez could explain further, they all heard the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed across the base. Heavy engines, moving fast, coming up the access road toward their isolated facility. The distinctive whine of turbocharged diesel engines pushed to their limits. The convoy screeched to a halt outside the facility with the urgency of a combat response. Heavy doors slammed, and the sound of military boots on concrete echoed through the training facility. Captain Morrison stood frozen as the outer door burst open with the force of authority. Colonel Martinez strode into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention from every ranger present. At 52, Colonel Martinez was a legend in ranger circles, a decorated veteran who had commanded both conventional and special operations forces in multiple combat theaters. Colonel Martinez ignored the rangers entirely, his eyes scanning the room until they found Morrison. When he spotted the elderly maintenance worker, his entire demeanor changed. The stern, commanding expression softened into something approaching reverence. Colonel Martinez walked directly to Morrison, who looked up from his work with mild curiosity. Then, in a gesture that stunned every ranger in the room, the colonel came to rigid attention and rendered the sharpest, most precise salute that anyone present had ever witnessed. "Master Sergeant Harold Morrison, United States Army Ranger Regiment, retired," Colonel Martinez said, his voice booming across the suddenly silent room. "Sir, on behalf of the United States Army Ranger Regiment, I apologize for the inexcusable disrespect shown to you here today." Morrison slowly returned the salute, movement still precise despite his age. "Colonel, no apology necessary. These men were doing their job as they understood it." The colonel held his salute for 5 full seconds before dropping his hand. Colonel Martinez turned to face the crowd of stunned rangers. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the facility, "allow me to introduce Master Sergeant Harold Ghost Breacher Morrison. He is a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and 3 Silver Stars. He served 5 tours in Vietnam and classified operations in Europe with special forces, conducting demolitions and breach operations behind enemy lines that officially never happened." Captain Morrison felt his knees go weak. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross. He was looking at one of the most decorated soldiers in special operations history. Colonel Martinez continued, his voice growing harder as he looked directly at Captain Morrison. "Master Sergeant Morrison's unit was responsible for breaching more hardened enemy fortifications than any other team in Southeast Asia. His ability to find the weak point in any defense was unparalleled. The enemy placed a bounty on his head for his uncanny ability to make their strongest bunkers disappear." Morrison shifted uncomfortably, his humble nature recoiling from public praise. Colonel Martinez reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small wooden box. Morrison's eyes widened slightly as he recognized it. "Master Sergeant, this belongs to you. It was lost in the Pentagon mail system for 30 years and finally found its way to my desk last week. He opened the box, revealing the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. Heroes like you don't get forgotten, Master Sergeant. They just get temporarily misplaced. The massive steel door groaned and began to swing open with a deep metallic sound that echoed through the facility. Morrison had quietly completed the override sequence while everyone focused on the colonel's arrival. Colonel Martinez lifted the Medal of Honor from its case, the blue ribbon and bronze star catching the fluorescent lights. Master Sergeant Harold Morrison, he announced formally, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving with the 5th Special Forces Group during Operation Prairie Fire, Cambodia, March 1969. Morrison stood at attention as the colonel continued reading the citation. When his 6-man reconnaissance team was surrounded by an estimated battalion of North Vietnamese regulars defending a fortified bunker complex, Master Sergeant Morrison single-handedly identified structural weaknesses in the enemy fortifications and, under intense fire, placed precision demolition charges that collapsed the entire complex, eliminating the threat and saving his team. Captain Morrison felt his world tilting on its axis. He had been dismissing a Medal of Honor recipient, a man whose courage under fire was officially recognized as extraordinary even by military standards. Colonel Martinez carefully pinned the medal to Morrison's faded red work shirt, the bronze star looking oddly appropriate against the humble fabric. "The Army lost track of you after your discharge, Master Sergeant. We've been trying to present this properly for 3 decades. Morrison touched the medal gently, his eyes distant with memory. "I never expected to see this again, sir. I figured the paperwork got buried somewhere in the system." Colonel Martinez turned to address the Rangers, who remained frozen at attention. "Gentlemen, you are looking at one of the most decorated soldiers in Army history. Master Sergeant Morrison's combat record includes operations that are still classified at levels about your clearance." He paused, letting that information sink in. His methods of identifying and exploiting structural weaknesses in enemy fortifications are still taught in advanced demolitions courses at the Ranger School. Morrison slowly rolled up his sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo of a stylized explosion with wings, the unofficial symbol of Special Forces demolition specialists. Colonel Martinez smiled knowingly and began rolling up his own sleeve. As the fabric moved up his arm, another tattoo became visible. The same design, but crisp and clear, obviously much newer. "This tattoo, gentlemen," the colonel said, displaying his arm next to Morrison's, "represents membership in a brotherhood that values precision and ingenuity over brute force. I earned mine at the Special Forces qualification course, carrying on traditions established by men like Master Sergeant Morrison." Captain Morrison stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Master Sergeant Morrison, I was completely out of line. I apologize for my disrespect and failure to recognize your expertise." Morrison gave him a tired but genuine smile. "Son, you are protecting your men and your mission. That's exactly what a good Ranger leader should do. The failure wasn't yours. It was a breakdown in communication up the chain." Colonel Martinez nodded approvingly. "For the next week, Master Sergeant Morrison will conduct advanced breaching and demolitions training with this company. Captain Morrison, you will assist and coordinate the training schedule." As Morrison prepared to return to his humble maintenance duties, now wearing the Medal of Honor on his faded red shirt, Captain Morrison finally understood that true expertise often comes disguised as ordinary competence, and the greatest teachers are often those who never announce their credentials. The ghost breacher had returned to teach a new generation that sometimes the oldest keys unlock the toughest doors.